December 12th, 2019. I am Peter Kaczynski. To my right is co-chair Doug Kellner. To my left is Commissioner Greg Peterson. And to my far right is Commissioner Andy Spano. We will go out of the Board of Elections and into the Board of Canvassers for our first order of business. And we will convene as a Board of Canvassers to certify the election of this past November, if the staff has documents that we should be reviewing.
So the first issue for the Board of Canvassers is the vacancy in the 57th Senate District and the certification for Mr. George M. Borello. There's 2 spots for each of you to sign if you're so inclined. Motion.
Yeah, I move that we approve the certification of the canvas as prepared by the staff for all
No, just the,
all of the offices
and
that are
then
presented.
this.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So it's adopted unanimously.
Did you do both the Senate and this?
We did everything,
Supreme Court, okay,
yeah, that
great.
motion
One
encompassed
motion.
all of the certifications.
So the next are
That will
the
also be the Supreme
Judicial
Court.
Supreme Court. One there and one here. You signed those, right? Just the list.
Is there a canvas sheet that goes with this?
It's right there. Oh, do you
No,
have the,
with
you have the
with the
Supreme?
Supreme.
It's right here.
What?
Dandy.
This is-
Commissioner Spanois. That one goes in that blue folder. You have the Senate folder. No, you signed what you need. That's Todd and mine side. You just gotta give Todd the folder. Go, Brenda.
Todd.
Okay, if there's no more business to come before the Board of Canvassers, we will adjourn out of the Board of Canvassers meeting and back into the Board of Elections meeting. So our first order of business as Board of Elections are the minutes from October 2nd. There are 2 sets of minutes, the public minutes and the Executive Committee minutes. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So both sets of minutes are adopted.
Just at one point of clarification, there was just
Sure.
one typo that one of the staff members found in the executive
Right.
minutes.
I think it's the 3rd or 4th paragraph, personal should be personnel.
So we just have to note
That's been,
that correction.
has that been adjusted or does it need to be adjusted?
We were working to adjust it when the alarm went
Oh,
off
okay.
this morning, so
Okay.
we didn't get
Okay.
that
So
far.
we're going to, we've adopted them as amended.
I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. All right, then we will begin unit updates. First, the executive, Bob Brem and Todd Valentine.
Well, obviously, we've been relocated due to the gas main leak in downtown Albany, and we thank the Department of Environmental Conservation for hosting us in their board meeting. We do appreciate that, and we'll make sure that we thank them profusely for allowing us to come in. We've been, since the election, we've been on a series of roundtables we've had with the county boards, and as well as the early voting system vendors is tomorrow. We've done 3 so far. And what we started to look at was, or asked them to talk to us about was what went well, what challenges did they face, and what changes they think would be necessary, either in legislation, regulation, or procedure. And then obviously we're collecting information about, well, what was the cost? Because look with an eye towards, well, what additional funding will you need when you go forward? So it's a little bit what did it actually cost you, and then what will you need in the future. And by and large, they all were echoed the hearing we had with regard with the legislatures, the Joint Assembly and Senate Election Law Committee, where we testified that overall it was a success. But there were challenges with the operations of the e-poll books as far as connectivity. Deliveries were delayed, so there were counties that would have liked to use them, but because of the lateness of the procurement process, weren't able to purchase them. So they were learning the challenges that the other face. Obviously, where the sites are located, where the equipment is in the site is a challenge. So you have to be cognizant of that when the two connect, when they connect. And going forward, one of the challenges was if you have large vote centers was there is limited memory on the devices, the electronic poll books. So if you want the signatures there, you have to pull them down one at a time from the cloud. And depending upon the configuration of the signature itself, there can be delays there. So that's something they have to look forward to. A lot of it had to do with the vintage of some of the signatures, because the older files were scanned at a much larger size, which prior we didn't care about because they were printed, so it didn't really matter.
Oh, no.
I think they're dismissing.
It takes a minute for it to gear up.
Anyway, we got my attention. That guy on the third floor, you keep.
Ours usually comes a little quicker than this, so.
This is pretty far removed from here.
All of our guests from 40 North Pearl Street may vacate the building. Go home for the day.
Okay. They'll be being vacated again.
Okay, I think we can continue. Go ahead.
So we're going to continue with that, and our plan is we have a meeting with the voting system vendors, the early poll book people we invited tomorrow, and then we have one more roundtable. We have one more roundtable scheduled for next Wednesday with the downstate region counties, and what we want to do from that, we've been collecting their information about what went good, the challenges that were faced, and obviously the cost information, and try to produce a report so that we can then start to educate, okay, here's for our legislative program or our changes to regulation, because that's what we're doing later on the agenda, is kind of holding those not final yet, because we know there are changes to be made, and we're coming up with a list of things that we know are problematic.
What did you, the impression you got on the cost?
On the
I mean, no numbers. Was it wider from what we got?
I don't know, because I haven't added it up. We've had about 31 counties that provided the information to us. So
Anyone complain about it?
complain about it? Well, there were complaints, yes.
Well, they didn't say,
I
"Oh,
mean,
goody."
Yeah, they didn't say, "Oh, goody." The challenges were like with the hours. One of the things we raised with them was, well, should we standardize the hours? Because they put in statute standardizing the primary election hours. Of course, the general election is standard hours. But they didn't do that for early voting. And actually, we heard from both sides. Some of them like the control ability to schedule that, and they liked the shorter hours, so they wouldn't want it longer because they found they could hire poll workers easier. But then there were other counties that said, well, we don't want everybody to work the entire shift. We're going to limit how many days you can actually work, because I don't want you to burn out for 9 days. Because it actually ends up being, for the regular staff, a much longer period, because you work the full week before, that whole week, and then the week after. So it ends up being more like a 20-day span where you don't get a day off. So that's part of the complaint. And when you get to the Sunday night, becomes an issue. Is that turnaround to produce the election day poll books was a challenge for many boards, and Erie County related a story to us. Well, their plan was, on the last Saturday, they started printing their poll books. The last Saturday of early voting, figuring, well, Sunday's not going to be busy. Well, that ended up being their busiest day, and that was true statewide. Now, we had no idea that would be the busiest day. We couldn't warn them. So they ended up, like, all through the night on Sunday to get the poll books printed, because they print in-house, to be prepared for delivery on Tuesday. So now, is it something, to consider that perhaps the hours on Sunday should be shortened a little bit? But if that's your busiest day, the legislature may not be willing to do that. But that's part of the logistical problem of having both of those weekends. And obviously, we know we face challenges when you have a longer period of time for physical issues. You know, we had a major rainstorm on the first Sunday where we believed that depressed turnout. But then on Halloween that Thursday, there was a declaration of disaster in 12 counties in the upstate region because of severe flooding. And in fact, one of the counties had to close for the day because they had a complete travel ban in the county, so they couldn't risk the lives of their poll workers. Well, actually, they couldn't travel. And none of the voters could get there, so, well, I guess we'll just close early voting because you couldn't do anything. But those are the challenges we see going forward when you have such a long period. And now it's not just 10 days next year, it'll be 27, because you have 3 early voting periods spread out. So the longer that is, the more these types of problems, and that's part of what we want to work on next year is a continuity of operations, is when you go to those issues. And it's not so much cybersecurity, although that's always a factor because we have more technology in the polling place. And those are challenges too. You're always going to have those, and connecting from the poll pad to the printer to print the ballot. Some printers can be bought. Those are normal. Those are not cybersecurity issues, but those connections need to be secure. And we send a team out to every county, not to every poll site, of course, but to every county to look into those cybersecurity issues and just the general operations at selected poll sites, because we couldn't do everybody in the 9-day period, but we got to every county. So we spent the time to go put our own boots on the ground to say, how is this working from our own report?
So if the Sunday before Election Day was the busiest day, what was the least busy day?
Least busy day?
Do we know?
Halloween.
Yeah.
Because it was Halloween.
It was during
So
the week.
did we see any sort of trend as it relates to how busy the days were? Were weekends busier than weekdays? Was it busier as we got closer to Election Day? I can certainly understand Halloween
You had
being
a
less.
storm in a significant number of
That's
places.
that's gonna affect it as well,
Yeah.
but I'm just trying to see if there's any sort of trend that we can see about how the election days were used and whether
We
each day
haven't
was
quite
I
deeply.
think
Certainly
that's,
Tom
I think
and
that's
Brendan
good.
can report
People
on
talk
that
about
in detail.
Tuesday versus Sunday all the time.
Because we had 2 weekends in there.
Yeah,
So I'm just curious, were the weekends the busiest days or weekdays? I mean, do you have that data or you don't have that data?
We've collected the data by day, and
There was actually a nice
and we can
table
provide
in
that
our-
with part of.
Yeah,
There was
if
a
we
nice
could do that
table
at
in
some
our
point, I think that'd be
testimony
helpful. I
for
mean, I understand the,
legislators. I don't have
storm
with me.
issue would affect
Yeah,
it.
but right.
I mean,
That's-
we
that's
gave
something you
that
can't count
level
on, but,
in-
maybe taking those
Right.
variables out, maybe we can see
In the
some sort
testimony
of
we
trend.
did, we gave at least some of that information, but certainly we're also looking at the final numbers because we didn't have like affidavit voters from early voting, and not that that would be a big number this cycle. But I think we can start to look at trends time of day. A couple of counties in our discussions with them tried some early hours. They thought, well, instead of always trying to get the shift up to 8 o'clock at night, a few came in, opened at 6 or 7 in the morning, thinking to get people before work. And the counties that did that told us nobody really showed up. But it's hard to tell yet whether there's been enough voter education to know that the trends are, we only have one election. So we certainly, I think it will help us to look at that information, what time of day. You can really look at a lot of the counties.
not only time of day though, but the day.
What days are, what days are busier? And with 5 hours are the minimum number you can be open on a weekend, or, as far, you can go longer, you can't go shorter. So some counties are open for 5 hours, some counties are open for longer on the weekend, but still with long hours in both categories. In almost every category, maybe 2 or 3 counties, that last Sunday was not the busiest day. But it, generally worked better than the counties thought, the way, and we all thought. The only other one, I think, from a pushback that we're hearing from a lot of people, is because it was our first time, some of the sites that did let them use them for early voting, because of the stress on the building and other programs over a 10-day period, basically asked the county, please don't, go find another site for next year. Some they learned it just didn't work out because of space. They had to pick these sites early, And there still were a lot of moving parts as far as equipment and security and all the other components. And I think they looked at and said, well, especially for next year when we'll expect a bigger turnout, this probably isn't the right fit. But a lot of the places, some schools that were selected are really pushing back. This is hard to be a 10-day, site for early voting. But other programs, whether they have after-school programs or other kind of revenue-type programs for the firehouse or the community room or the whatever, are really concerned that they might not be the best choice for early voting. And it basically came up because Article 4 is really driven to get people to pick tax-free, tax-exempt property as early voting sites. New York City had asked us to look at if they were going to start paying for rent for something like early voting sites, could we help to come up with uniform standards so that they wouldn't be accused, or other counties, if they got into paying for rent, at least could say this is a fair number, if we could help them to identify, what are the factors for those incidental expenses that might be considered a reasonable amount of money to pay for rent, so that if we came up with that, then the counties could rely on it maybe. And they also put in place in the city a contract type vehicle, but it's not a contract, but a vehicle that would allow them
It's a license to use.
license to use a site, to make sure that they had arranged something. So a lot of that's a little different than Article 4, which has been driven all these years to go and say, repick your site, it's tax exempt, we're using it. So if you go to your legislative body and say, I need money now, they're going to say, why do you need money? This says go use that tax exempt site. And frankly, for election day, there's always been this tension anyway. But now when it's really 10 days and you got to bring this stuff in and then pick it up after, it's really a little longer than 10 days. That ties up a lot of locations throughout the state. So I think that's where we will have to do some more work.
What is
in
the
the long
major objection to just have people get absentee ballots?
Other than the law.
And security and chain of custody. You're now making the Postal Service part of your election administration
I
process.
don't need to send it all out. I mean, when I apply, I fill out a form and then they send it to me. I mean, so.
If it works.
Well, but that's.
Well, I mean, frankly,
that's
I
tremendous.
think most of our issues, as far as ballot security, come up with absentee ballots, and even coercion. I mean, there's always this concern that absentee voters are being coerced into how they're voting, and, there is an issue that's always arisen in that context. I mean, the problems we've
I've seen
had
that happen.
have been, sometimes in nursing homes, other
I've seen it.
vulnerable communities, so.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
But there's lots of support for it, and it may be the future.
Well,
But
all
I
these
but I don't
problems go
think it's
away.
a good idea.
I'm with you.
For that reason.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had two other issues about early voting I wanted to
Sure.
just ask about. I think it's my understanding that all but 5 jurisdictions did countywide early voting, that you could go to any poll site.
All but 5?
Yeah, New York City, Westchester.
You had to go to the.
You had to go to an
You go to-
assigned site.
Yeah, we think of it in a
I think
slightly
it's
different
4,
term.
but
Okay,
I think
I'm
it's
sorry.
4.
It was New
Okay.
York City, Westchester, Orange County, and Albany.
Okay. So were there any problems that arose out of the multiple sites where a voter could go to any site in the county to do their early voting? Has there been any feedback with any problems or issues that arose from that?
For the counties that use the vote center model.
Right.
The only thing we had heard a little bit was, as Todd said, for the counties that found their signature file was big, it took a little bit longer for the signature to show up to compare. So when the voter checked in and could be able to sign the poll pad, it's the next step when the comparison signature would appear next to it. It took a little bit of time. we heard a little bit of that if it just lost the ability to receive it quickly.
Well, there were challenges with the affidavit process that one county mentioned, I think it was Onondaga, because the way the poll book, because the inactive list cannot be sent to the poll site pursuant to statute, you couldn't necessarily utilize the electronic poll book because it, in many instances, relies upon having that list in there to validate that, and then they know what ballot to issue from the electronic printer. So they would have to have a separate stock of pre-printed affidavit ballots because there were limitations on the ability to produce an on-demand ballot printer. And maybe that's a technology issue, but that was a challenge they faced because they had to have this stock available at the poll site. You had to have a small stock of every affidavit ballot style available. Now, they had a limited number of sites, so it wasn't like 37 or anything large like that, but there was a challenge with that. And New York City faces a slightly different challenge. We did talk with them because they were at the last round table. We haven't seen Rockland or Nassau or the Suffolk at this point, but they have more languages, so thus they're going to have more ballot styles that they're going to have to face, and that goes towards the signature issue because the size of the poll pad is limited, and if you have to draw it down on the cloud, which is doable, you have to make sure that you have sufficient connectivity so that it can actually do it in a it's got to be almost instantaneous, or else the voter's sitting there waiting for you to where's the signature, waiting for it to pop up, it's just going to be very frustrating to the voters. So I think there's some technological
The BMD
hurdles.
can't handle all the languages in New York City either.
They do have a problem with that because the BMD themselves that they currently use can only support about, because of the large size of the audio files that have to get loaded on there, they estimate they can only fit about 2 ADs worth of ballot styles on a BMD.
On the early vote.
On the early voting, right. So it would, so you'd have to have, probably like 11, they estimated like 11 BMDs per site just in order to accommodate that language. And I don't know any way to really, because you can't make the BMD like memory bigger, and the audio files, they're just large just because, well, you have extra languages, particularly in Queens and Brooklyn and Manhattan, those three boroughs, whereas the Bronx and Staten Island only have the double language
English
Spanish,
and Spanish.
right? So that's where it's workable, whereas Nassau has that, and Erie has that. So those become manageable, but those are serious hurdles to overcome.
A lot of counties had indicated, since it was kind of a pilot, we call it a very large pilot, at the first rollout of this, that they had learned through this effort that they think they need more equipment for poll pads or for ballot on demand printers just to service their early voting sites, because it really was a low, if the 4-year cycle, this is the lowest turnout historically in the 4-year cycle. So we had about 3 million, give or take, voters this year, and next year we'll have about 8 million. So they're realizing, they had very nice things to say about it, they started with, but they also said, we think we need more
All right,
equipment.
and then
And some need more voting equipment, whether it's ballot marking devices or machines.
the next subject is to go back to the cost issue, which I think Commissioner Kosinski started with. Are we doing analyses of the cost?
Normally, operations ask for that information in the January, February time period for the annual statistical report. We sent that out right after the election as part of the roundtable and asked people to get us the information by December 2nd. Some are still busy, we're busy finishing certifying the election, but I think as we've seen in the agency, we have about 31 counties had responded. We raise it at every early voting session, and we're trying to collect them all as part of this effort, because the legislators had asked us for the number, the governor's office asked us for the number, a lot of, we knew we wanted it. And we are also tracking, I have to say, under the grant program, we are for reimbursement under capital and aid to locality, we have paid 2 counties, Niagara and Yates, because they were the first ones who submitted them. And there are 6 other counties that are in for actual payment of their vouchers. But everybody else is, there's a few counties out there, stragglers, for whatever reason, haven't given us their contract yet. But we're tracking the money so we can see how much of that $24 million was spent, but more importantly, how much did it cost us to run early voting in the first year? And we also asked them to tell us, will you need to buy more equipment for next year? Because we started to hear that early on. And, you know, what would be the, we've asked the county boards of elections, but by the time we're together at the winter conference, January 6th through the 9th, to tell us what is the right number to advocate, what do we think the right number is that we're gonna need for the budget.
So, you know, the Daily News did an editorial where they claimed that the cost of early voting in New York City was $400 per early voter. I think their numbers are wrong because they're building in the cost of, the capital costs of purchasing the equipment as if it was only going to be used for the one event. But still, I think that it would be helpful to have that information assembled so the legislature can make a reasoned decision on whether the cost is worth the benefit.
Sure. They asked us, when Todd and I spoke at the, I think it was,
The
let's
joint
check the
hearing.
date, the November joint hearing before the Senate and Assembly. And there were 14 members there for that session. It was the largest panel I've seen in a while. And they had asked, and we told them we were doing this effort, and we would give them a copy of that follow-up report.
Yeah,
early
I
in
think
January.
there's 2 good reasons. I think you alluded to one. I think we need to know what the cost-benefit ratio is, but also, as an unfunded mandate, you know, the county should be looking for state reimbursement, or I assume they will, and the state budget's coming up, and I think if we're gonna pursue this, they need to be aware that we need to pursue it earlier rather than later through the budgetary process.
How did the turnout compare? The overall turnout between the early voting and the voting? Compared with the previous one?
You want to just review that chart, Bob?
I'm sorry.
The turnout, the percentage
I
of
don't have
people
it
who
with
used
me
early
because
voting?
I didn't grab it. It was on my desk and I grabbed the green folders and I did. But,
It just wasn't big or small.
oh, right. Well, in 2015, it was slightly over 2 million voters, 2 million and change voters in 2015.
Which is
In
the
this
most comparable
cycle,
election.
based on the unofficial election night number, we had roughly 97,000 affidavit ballots. They had to decide whether they were valid or not, but they still showed up to vote. So that's part of the number. And then the absentee number, I thought, was about 150,000. So add them all together, we're near 3 million voters without getting the final, I haven't seen the final certified whole number of voters. But it's 3 million. So.
And out of that 3 million, how many were early? Do you know?
257,000 were early, so about 8% maybe of the total number of people who did vote were early, the rest were.
And what was the
other-
previous number, the first number?
In 2015,
Overall.
overall turnout was 2 million and change.
So this was greater than. You got almost 1 million people more.
Yeah, I don't remember what the enrollment was in 2015.
But our chart
So
compares
we've had
that.
more voters.
The
so-
turnout went up.
Yes.
Okay.
So just for, the chart we made showed the total number of voters now, how many voted early. We're waiting for the certified number of how many, the final number of everybody else. And so you can see the chart for each county compared against 2015.
Good. be helpful.
There was more advertising than there normally would be for a regular election without early voting.
Yes and no. You know,
Well, there are more press stories, not
Yeah,
necessarily
right, well, I've got
advertising.
more
press
public
helped,
information.
but it
that
was a
was-
brand new program, so I think if you look at, did people factor it into, like the campaigns and it was new to everybody. So, you know, a lot of things, I think people will start including early voting as the candidate to get the message out a little bit differently. And there wasn't a lot of that I noticed. There was a little bit, but there wasn't a lot. You know, just, so I think you'll see some of that.
I got mail from a number of
Everybody will
candidates.
understand.
I got mail from a number of
Well, I
candidates.
can only speak to Schenectady where I live, but even talking to some of the other counties, they
only
really,
sent it to
they
me.
really hadn't connected yet. But I think we'll see that grow because it's just the nature of, you know, you run in the cycle and you use the tools you have. But I did notice that it wasn't fully kicking in yet from that perspective.
Well, I think for a first shot, the time you had,
Oh.
it was good turnout. It
Well,
was good,
that was
worked very well,
the main point.
considering what could have happened.
The main point we made was, this wasn't like on May 1st, there was a book that had everything figured out and
Right.
the path
Agree.
was laid out. There was a lot of risk early on. The counties had to make decisions before we even knew the voting, the e-poll books would be ready or the contract would be in place. So that even the money would be approved because of the problems we had getting those grant programs approved. So there were a lot of hoping it all came together at the end. You know, and as in the Suffolk County case, they had announced that they were going to be geographically located because they were afraid that if all of the things they were planning didn't come together, that's all they could support. But they in their own plan, they had a spot where they said, if it comes together by this date, we can expand. Expanding is good, to offer more services than you thought, as long as you can effectively do them. Retracting would be a sign of failure. And they got to a happy point in their plan, and they made the decision to say they were going to do vote centers. And I thought that worked. That was a good model, because there were a lot of counties that, you know, they pulled their hair out, you know, what hair they had left, and they were biting their nails, because it really came to the last minute of that Thursday leading up to early voting. So I think the county commissioners did a great job in very challenging times to put this out. And it wasn't the philosophical disagreement that maybe people had, is early voting a good idea or a bad idea. Everybody rolled up their sleeves and said, we got to do this. And they did the best they could. And I think they did a marvelous job on a really tough.
Yeah, I think a decision to do it this year instead of next year was a
They-
really good one.
Well, yes.
Anything else on early, you guys have anything else besides early voting on the report on?
There's one other item I wanted to raise, and I since you've asked. It's not a surprise that we continue to have a challenge with our budget. We plan to have for you at the end of this quarter an analysis of where we are with the money, and
That'll be the end of this month.
Correct.
Right.
So we believe at your January 16th meeting that you schedule, we will come to you with a fine tuning of that resolution you've already adopted to allow us to use up to $1.2 million of the cybersecurity money to pay day-to-day expenses. From our forecast here today, I think we're going to have to ask you to go slightly above that number. I just don't know the number yet, but we would, after this quarter is completed, with our forecast for the fourth quarter, we will come to you in January with a resolution asking for that approval. But one of the programs is the online voter registration program. We have no money to run that program. We submitted as an agency a plan on August 7th to the Division of Budget per their request. They had indicated at the time the bill was being passed in the budget that the state board should provide a detailed plan, and they would fund it out of resources other than our agency resources. We submitted that plan on August 7th. Today we received an answer while we were sitting here waiting for this meeting to start that they expect to fund it and give us the answer but we have incurred approximately $400,000 in expenses so far without a way to pay
Did you
them.
give them a date that you,
They claim that they fully plan on answering our questions and that they fully are committed to funding it, and they just need a little bit more time to tell us how. But it would be my recommendation at your meeting in January, if they haven't given us a real way to pay the bills, it's, I can't ask you to pass that resolution without resolving it by then, because it's almost $700,000 this fiscal year planning to pay to prepare to implement OVR. We put in our budget request the next fiscal year to pay to build it. So we either have to park it and stop until we get money, or they have to answer the question, how do we pay the bills?
so you want a discussion at the next meeting around the fact that whether we stop this program or don't stop it, depending on where we get the money?
Well, I think we need to stop
Right?
it
Well, I
at
just
that
think that we ought
time.
to get that comment on the record
Yes.
today.
Yeah, I think, my understanding of the situation is that budget is telling us, go ahead, keep working on this program, keep spending money for this program, even though it is not appropriated. And we will continue, and budget is continuing to look for the source to cover that expenditure. Now, obviously, that's not the ideal way to run a government agency. But budget is telling us to go ahead and keep working on this program, even though it does not have a budgeted appropriation. That's my understanding.
Is that what you guys are hearing?
Well, we just got that answer from budget.
That was the first time we
while were here.
heard.
So that's their
from them
recommendation,
since
is that we
August.
just
Yes.
keep moving forward, spending money we don't have, and they will find money at some later date to backfill
Yes.
the money we're expending.
But that's
Is
what
that-
they've said since we met with them right after the budget was adopted in April, and that's what they
I
said.
mean,
They
to be
need
honest, I'm already
resources.
concerned that we're taking money out of cybersecurity and devoting it to just normal, everyday operations of this agency, because cybersecurity is such a big issue. And I'm a little surprised, frankly, that there's been this willingness by the administration to say, well, fine, take that money and use it for something else, because cybersecurity to me is a priority. And we're already delving into that part of our budget and taking money
That
out of
wasn't a
there.
temporary fix either, that was
Right.
that was part of the budget.
Well,
It was, that was part of the budgeting process, you're right, which concerned me at the time and still does, but now it's even getting apparently worse. They're making us take even more money out of cybersecurity to cover these costs, assuming, if they don't find another source for us.
I mean, what they say is that they feel that, what they say is, they believe that our agency has enough money to spend on these bills.
This is what,
Without-
you're talking budget.
What budget has said, and our Deputy Secretary, Jonathan Smith, especially after the time we voted to take the 1.2 million, was that they have enough money in the budget, as they say so, to pay these bills. Todd and I and Tom Jerose and Jennifer Blanche, our HR people, and Bill Cross, and our hosted team at the Office of General Service has spent way too much time that we should have dedicated to early voting and so many other things to track all these dollars. And by our forecast, if you put in that $700,000 to pay for this year's planning of OVR, we're somewhere about 2.4 million in the hole. We have checked every couch cushion, every residual account, every federal dollar, every state dollar, and there is no money left in the cookie jar. And we have laid that out and put it in front of all, and to be honest, that story hasn't changed. In the 4 memos that you all received from us on this subject since January, it hasn't changed since then. So the only thing that has changed is they stopped calling us irresponsible people for saying it, because we have proved we were right. But what we're at is, how do we solve it? They claim that they're working with us to solve it, and I'm hopeful of that. Todd and I sat down
I think
with-
we have to take them at their word.
But we met with them on April 14th and
Right
said,
after the
we have a busy year. We can't spend the whole year figuring out where the money is. We have to do these programs. So I would like to resolve the dollars so that we stop having this structural problem and we can actually focus on running the day-to-day elections.
So Bob, you said that the governor's office, as they do every year, called you and asked for suggestions on what should go into the state of the state.
Yeah, my recommendation is to keep it simple, pledge to fully fund this year's initiatives that they signed into law.
Don't
Okay.
forget public financing.
That's an initiative they signed into law because they
It's part
signed
of
the
it.
budget chapter putting that in place.
But it was a pretty simple sentence.
Yeah.
He could keep the speech pretty short.
Fully funded.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Anything else from the co-executive directors? No? Okay, then we'll move on to council. That'll be Kim Galvin and Brian
That
Clark.
does play right into the public financing, should it survive the 22nd for the legislature to come back and amend it, which I'm anticipating that it will, and the
You
legal
are?
challenge. Yeah, that it will survive.
Oh,
so-
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, let me just ask a question about that, now that you've raised that. If the legislature doesn't return by December 22nd and make amendments, what prevents them from coming back
Nothing.
January 4th and making amendments?
Nothing.
So this idea that if it doesn't happen by the December 22nd, somehow this
artificial.
program is set in stone, is not real, is it? I mean, that
No.
could be changed at any time by the
it
legislature,
can.
right? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make that clear. I think that's been sort of misrepresented out there, that, oh, if this December 22nd date
Well, I think
passes,
it's being
suddenly there's no
misrepresented by the
going
people
back.
that want it misrepresented,
Oh.
that don't want it, that don't want to come in and change it.
Well, having worked at the
and make the hard
legislature, I never
choices.
quite understood this idea that somehow this date
Well,
meant
can't touch it
anything.
now.
Right, I know, if the legislature comes back, they come back and do it if they want to, so.
Yeah, don't tell them that.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, fair
So, they're in court right now, 2:00.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
On the public financing case out in Niagara County. So the commission's work has taken me a little out of pocket, but it was good. It was
Well,
a
Kim,
good
I think
experience.
we all agree that you did an outstanding job.
It was a worthy cause that
On the
you
commission,
went out of pocket
and,
for.
and that you made a great contribution, and even though you did not support the final resolution, you made a big impact on what was adopted.
Well, thank you. I tried to make it clear that, obviously, those against the program were outnumbered, but we endeavored to do the best that we could to make it as workable as we could, should it get passed and withstand the court challenges that are anticipated. And I think to the credit of all 9 members that, everybody had slightly or drastically different agendas depending on what day it was, but I think everybody worked to do the best that they could under the circumstances, even though it's a strange way to create a $100 million program. But that being said, they're out in court there today. Since our last meeting, we've been busy. That's an understatement. We've had a trial in the Common Cause case. The trial SWAT team went down to New York City and managed themselves very well. From what I understand, we've obviously had the early voting, we've had election day, we've had all the calls and everything leading up to all of the election day and the early voting and all the questions on, time off from work took most of our time. We finished up the campaign commission, which is another thing. It's very difficult to try to plan for a program that needs immediate action when you don't have the money to do it, when there's court cases challenging it. So it's an interesting,
Succinctly put.
it's an interesting scenario. I mean, the 3 new campaign finance commissioners are set to be appointed in June. And it's anticipated that the rules and regulations will be in some form of draft by then. Okay, but we have us, we can do that probably, but then we need software changes to the already overworked IT staff with no money to do that. So I think we'll make it past today's court challenges, but we've already been put on notice that there will be several more challenges to various aspects, and there is no severability clause, and whatever that means, I don't really know what's gonna happen with the end of it, but it's a difficult situation to manage, because it's a huge, obviously, program that will require many people, a new office, computers, you know, to do it right. I basically staked my life on it for those other commission members, so we're gonna try to do the best that we can. But those are some issues that we're facing.
Could I interrupt you just for a minute?
No.
They're beginning to lock down our building. We won't be able to get anything out. So does anybody at this table need Tom Gerose to pick anything up for us so we can go home today?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Cheryl.
Okay.
So that's all in flux. I've been, you know, obviously the people in the compliance unit have been thinking about it. We've talked about it. Brian and I have talked about it. We've all talked about it, but it's gonna be interesting after Christmas or the holidays to actually focus on that, because it's gonna require almost immediate attention to get software in order by the time, with the clawback provisions and the matching provisions that we're gonna need.
These new compliance commissioners, they're gonna meet separately?
No.
No.
Or with us?
With you. The new compliance commissioners are 3 added to the 4.
Oh, okay.
We are all commissioners.
All commissioners.
Right, so as I was explained and we discussed and envisioned, as you sat as the Board of Canvassers today, you came out, you sat as the State Board of Elections, you come out, you sit
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
Public
yeah,
Financing
yeah.
Commission.
What happens to the enforcement council?
She continues to do what she does now.
Does she vote?
Did not show up.
What does she do now?
No, she
no
has,
vote.
no, she has nothing to do with this new program, nothing.
No, but right now,
Right.
if there's a tie on those issues.
No, but that will continue with the State Board of Elections. She has absolutely nothing to do with the public financing program.
Okay,
No
right,
enforcement component, no,
Well, and indeed, any office that's covered by that program now will be enforced by the new 7 commissioners, right?
Correct.
should both of the candidates participate in the program, they fall, or one or the other, they fall under the jurisdiction of the new board.
So her jurisdiction's actually been somewhat reduced.
Clipped a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother part of the new program that has to be set up that we have no money for and don't know will survive. Okay, so we've had many meetings, as they talked about, with the IT department on online voter registration. They've already talked about that. Calls have started on the 2020 primaries for president. Lots of them on one side in particular. We've done the regular work of the units, compliance health, filing reviews. The New York City Campaign Finance Board has a lot of questions on the bill that was passed that says if you file there, it satisfies your requirement to file here.
We can determine that, right? Yes. We have to determine that.
Right, so we have to work through all those questions and figure out how to implement that. 200 or so LLC statements have been filed, setting out their ownership percentages. So Brian and I discussed posting as of a certain date to give the filers, because we're getting foils, and now the committees are calling, did my LLC file because they wouldn't give it to me? Did they give it to you? Do I have to give the money back? So we're gonna post as a certain date all of those that we've received and then update it, because they have until the 31st to continue to file those partnership statements with us. We have some regulations coming up later on the agenda. We have the conference in early January, trying to figure out what we're gonna do there. And we had Thanksgiving 2 weeks ago and Christmas in 2 weeks. And I think that's about it. Unless anybody has any questions specifically.
And I have nothing to add. Unless there are questions, so.
Any questions for the councils? If not, we'll move on to election operations. Tom Connolly and Brendan Lavallo.
And Commissioner, I'll do my best to remember my unit report from memory, since it's back at my desk. But obviously, we were doing a lot of work around Election Day and the early voting period. We did our best to support the boards as this was their first time implementing this program. We had staff available for all hours of the early voting throughout the voting period, so that if anyone had a question while polls were open in any county, we had someone available at the state board available for them. As Todd mentioned, we did go out and visit at least one early voting site in every county. We covered 4,300 miles, in case anyone wasn't wanting to know, in the first 7 days. Brennan and I both went out. There were 8 of us in total that covered the entire state. I did Long Island and all 5 boroughs on Halloween, so that was a fun drive. Then obviously after the election, we worked with, on election night, we worked with the county boards to get all their election results into our system for publishing, because some of them had been segregated between the early voting and the election day results, so we had to make sure they were able to merge those and provide them to us for election night. Subsequent to election day, we did work with all of the county boards to get a list of all of the affidavit voters, and we were then able to aggregate that with the help of IT department within the time frame that was set forth in the regulations, so that we were able to share all affidavit voters with all counties statewide. We also attempted to do somewhat of a matching algorithm to see if there was a voter in an affidavit voter in one county that also tried to vote by affidavit in another county. That resulted in there being nobody. There were 0 matches. We also then obviously worked with getting statements of canvass from all the boards for the results that you certified earlier in the meeting. With regard to the voting machines, as for ES&S, we continue to work with the vendor, the testing lab SLI, and also the independent security consultant, which has NISTech, who also contracted another firm, ATSEC, to do a review of the secondary source code and the testing that ES&S and their vendor had done. We continue to go back and forth with them, asking for additional information or for them to provide us with documentation on some of the test cases. That's ongoing. There is a tentatively scheduled public demonstration of the ExpressVote XL to occur at the board on January 14th at 1 p.m. With regard to Dominion, they're working on an improved hash checking procedure. The reason they're doing it is for the ICE machine, the new ICE machine. They already have a program in place on the older ICP. So it's a little bit more of an onerous or manual process to do the hash checking on the ICE. So they're working to kind of create a procedure that would create some sort of an equivalent, so it's easier for county boards to get the hash value to ensure that the software on the machine is indeed the certified software. With regard to Clear Ballot, there will be we anticipate there being some engineering change orders, probably at the next meeting I will mention, just for some end-of-life equipment, namely some laptops and server hardware. On the front of new vendors, I had mentioned at the last meeting that we were going to be having a meeting with Hart Intercivic about their voting system. That meeting did get rescheduled and will actually be occurring next week. They're going to be coming in to having a conversation with us about the certification process, so as to decide whether or not they want to submit a system for certification. In addition, Democracy Works, Democracy Live came in last month to show us their Omni ballot, which is it's a standalone ballot marking device that comes in a little bit of a briefcase. They're considering submitting that. One of the nice things about that is that it was able to create ballots that can be read on the certified scanners. So they're only looking to possibly submit just the BMD only part of things. And they say that it should be able to work with both systems. But they came in, they gave us a demo of it, along with some individuals from Microsoft, because Microsoft built some of the components of the system. And we're continuing those conversations with them. Also, we've been participating in the early voting roundtables with the counties. I know we just had one recently on Monday. We do have one tomorrow with the vendors, and that's the vendors for the e-poll books, the ballot printers, the voting machines themselves, and the voter registration system. So basically all the different technology vendors that are involved in some way, shape, or form from beginning to end for early voting. We invited them to the table so that we can get their kind of feedback on how they thought it was kind of rolled out, and if they think there are any improvements that can be done that we might want to recommend to the legislature or change through regulation. We are also scheduling one-on-one calls with each of the e-poll book vendors next week to kind of really dive a little bit deeper into their experience with their customer base on election day, early voting, and if they were used on election day, to try to figure out if there are issues that need to be resolved at the very least before the April election. And then obviously if there are other changes that were made from their customers, we want to kind of talk and get that feedback and figure out how can we get those changes implemented, those changes submitted to us so that we have time to do our review, make sure they're complying with all the different requirements, make sure we can do our security and vulnerability testing as well, so that we could possibly bring that before you for approval for any kind of additional systems or newer revisions to the systems. I think that's pretty much all I can remember at this point.
You must have memorized that thing before you got here.
Well, it was on the screen, so I can still remember what the screen looks like.
Questions? Questions?
On the issue with the signatures for the e-poll books, that I had the experience of using the No Ink system in New York City, and it's virtually impossible to write a signature on the screen that looks anything like my regular signature or the signature that's already in the book. So that as a biometric identification device, it appears to be useless, in my view. But I wonder if your unit is looking into that issue. Is there guidance to the counties? For example, I can't imagine that poll workers are actually challenging people because their signatures don't look right. And then I noticed an email from Commissioner Green in Chautauqua County where he said that the vendor on their system actually allows the board to update the signature on record with the scribble that
Why
comes
would you
from
do
the
that?
poll book. Well, that was his question. So I'm suggesting that this needs to be added to the to-do list of the operations unit, is to look into this issue, and that for all of us, we may
You're
be
right.
thinking about how we advise the legislature on this.
Why is the signature so?
Well, two things. One is it's usually you sign something when it's down on the desk.
Right.
This thing is on a bias, so that's number one. Number two, if you've ever tried to do this in a supermarket or
I was
anything like
gonna
that,
say, yeah.
it's a scribble. So
But
if you look at your normal signature, it's a whole different
But
thing.
the difference between the supermarket and the election is that in the supermarket, it's an electronic signature simply to close the contract.
Right.
In other
But
words,
it's proof you're there.
Yeah.
Right. The supermarket is to prove there's a person there.
no, Bob, I'm talking now on a legal analysis under Article 4 of the Uniform Commercial Code, that the signature, even if it's a scribble, the very fact that you put a mark on it, it's the equivalent of putting an X. You've now closed this legal requirement for entering into the credit contract that's required under the Uniform Commercial Code. That's not the reason for the signature in election administration. In election administration, the signature was the best means of biometric identification in the 1840s when they first started
Right.
using the
Doesn't work now.
signatures. Well, I mean, it doesn't work through an e-poll book in my
No,
view.
it doesn't.
And of course, there are other means of biometric identification now that are much better. I turn on my laptop with my thumbprint. I can
We'd be
imagine.
all for that if you wanted them to get their
Well,
thumbprint as identification.
I'm for it too, but I think that
I have
there'll
facial
be,
recognition on mine.
Me too.
Yeah.
there'll be major pushback from civil liberties
No, but
groups,
you're absolutely
but-
right, though.
but-
I have tried on the supermarket ones, well, initially, because I like to write my signature. I gave that up and started just writing my signature. Now I don't do anything, I just scribble. And that's the progression I think you might find with voters after a while if it just doesn't come out right.
But, well, that's why I'm saying, I'm raising the issue, it's not at the top of the agenda, but it's something
Thumbprint.
to keep in mind, and I would certainly urge that
And an ID
you
card.
think about what guidance should be given to the counties on the issue, especially, you know, New York doesn't require ID to begin with.
That would be the simplest
That was,
way.
that was
That'd be the
the,
simplest thing, you're right.
but then there's also this issue of whether counties should use these scrawls on an e-poll book to update their registration record, and
But they use the poll book now
I think
to
that
make
needs
that
examination.
decision. And, I mean, first of all, there's two issues. If the signature is so scribbly, did they have the correct person sign it? Is still the responsibility of the Constitution and the statute. So I don't know how we necessarily move beyond it, other than what guidance should we give to make sure they're doing it right.
that can be changed, though, and that's our
No,
job, is to
I
recommend
agree, as
those
part of the
changes if
analysis, we
think
should
so.
do that. But I'm saying is, having the ability to upload a signature if you should want to, an example, name change. Now you have the signature. It's only in the new gadget as opposed to the hard printed that you had up till now. So the statute still says you can sign as your new name, but you still want to make sure you've captured it for the next time. So some of that we have to work out. The other issue that came up a little bit that you mentioned with the ID, there's some wording issues I think we have to make sure that we put into the guidance for inspectors. An example, in Erie County, they had a postcard, made it perfectly clear that if you use this postcard, it had a barcode on it, it would help expedite your
New York City
experience.
does that with the fast pass.
But it was a lovely card with nice messages that you don't need to bring it, it's not required, but if you use it, it helps you. New York City had a similar card without necessarily the messaging that went with it, or at least they only showed me the card. I didn't see if there was other messaging.
I saw the messaging when
So-
I got mine.
So we've had a few places, even one of our own employees said, they asked me for my driver's license. And it was because the devices have a barcode reader and it can read your name and it would speed you through. So Erie County, because they did a special mailing, they have a lot of people who used it. And it really shows a speeding of the line. And if you look at it for next year, it's a good thing to have, but we want to make sure it's worded correctly so that voters know the expectation. We did get a few calls, and I know,
It's not ID.
I know the league is here, and they raised it a little bit in some of what they saw, and a number of other people did to us. People heard whatever word you said, they thought it was checking my ID.
It's a sensitive issue.
So it's a sensitive issue, and we need to give guidance to the county about how to
But
deal
that's
with
his
it
point.
correctly. Not to don't do it, but if you're gonna train people, here's the way to do it. And also to train the public as to, you know, this is a good thing. And there are some people in the list who need their ID verified also. So we just wanna make sure everybody understands that this is here, it's a new thing, especially in vote centers where you have common name. Paul Collins, our former deputy counsel, saw me in Albany, of all places. There was a friend of his who has a rather Irish name, and he went to the vote center. And when he got there, somebody else by the same name had signed his, because there were many people by the same name. They picked the wrong person. So he voted an affidavit. But the card, if you got a common name like Bob Smith, and you're in Manhattan, and there's 300 of them, they still have to scroll down to find the right one. The card could help to speed the line.
It would help.
It would help.
Did help.
So it's what we learned. There were a few calls. It's not a crisis level, but we want to be at the front of making sure that we give guidance to the county as quickly as we can for the next time, because it will help.
And if we used a fingerprint, that it also.
Well, I'm,
And then
Just
you
like-
would have
just
the
like a
problem
phone,
of remembering
for
to
everything
bring
else.
it.
Whether it helps or not is not the issue that he brought up. He brought up that the
Well, there's still
signature
that
doesn't look
issue.
like the signature.
Well, you could be challenged on that. The inspectors could challenge you. If
I-
you go there and say, my
I
name is
understand
Greg
the thing about
Peterson,
slowing things down.
and they say, okay, it's not, whoop, they can challenge your signature.
The whole issue on this stuff.
And then
is-
all you'd have to do is
So
take the
Then you
oath.
show your license or.
No,
take-
you don't
yeah,
have
no,
to
you're right,
say
take the
it.
oath.
All you
Yes,
have to do is
right.
take the oath, so it isn't really that productive to
No.
even make the challenge.
but when I started in '91, we had real things in a book. with 30 spots for you to sign. And you had the original buff card in the book. And you could see as people progressed with their signature, whether it be age or disability or just stopped signing it the same way. So you could see as it went that it's not the same one as when you registered in 1983, but it's different. You don't see that anymore because there's only one image that you get to look at.
Right. So look, these are all issues. I'm just suggesting that this has to be on the agenda, although maybe not at the very top of the agenda.
Okay, that's a good issue. Anything else then for election operations? If not, we'll move on to the NVRA. John Conklin, Cheryl Kauser.
Thank you, Commissioner. So the Public Information Office was very busy since the last board meeting. We've had lots of inquiries. Obviously, early voting was a very significant undertaking. We had lots of questions about it. We were still getting questions on the deadline to change one's enrollment as well. We had questions about the grants that the state received, the political calendar, different vacancies in office that are occurring around the state, the electronic poll books. Campaign finance is always an area where we receive questions, a little bit about the MOVE Act, but the topic that has returned to the top of the list once again is time off to vote. We had many questions about that around Election Day, so that has receded since then, but it came back with a bullet to the top of the chart again. So the 2018 annual report is complete.
2018.
So I had intended to have copies for you all, but
Wow.
they're back in the office.
So it is complete.
It is complete.
Excellent.
We have every unit in it. It'll be posted as soon as we have the opportunity to get back in the office, and we'll put it up, and I'll have copies for you gentlemen at the earliest convenience.
Posting mine is sufficient.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Me as well. Posting is fine.
Okay.
Me too.
I'll
Make
take
it
it
unanimous,
out.
Greg?
Post them all.
Save the tree.
Okay, so we processed 115 foils in October and 99 in November. We issued 3 press releases since the last board meeting. The first one was for the voter registration deadline for the general election. The second one was on unofficial turnout numbers for early voting that we did Sunday before Election Day. And the third was to discuss the testimony that Bob and Todd did at the joint hearing in New York City for the Senate and the Assembly. So we also helped prepare that testimony for the joint hearing. We helped organize and attend the early voting roundtables. We also have the new voter registration form that's coming up because the legislature made the change making 16-year-olds eligible to pre-register. So those forms are being shipped out this month in preparation for the deadline, for the enacting date, which is January 1st. They'll be effective January 1st. DMV notified us that they will be updating their website with that issue as well on January 1. And the customer-facing devices that I have in every office will be updated January 2nd. So with regard to the website, we posted election night results for state Supreme Court, as Tom mentioned, and also for the special election in the 57th Senate District. We posted the webcast and the transcript for the October 2nd meeting. We had to post some updates to the 2020 political calendar and the 2019 political calendar. And it was my intention today to post a memo or a summary memo on the presidential primary ballot access provisions for the Democratic and the Republican plan. So that was approved yesterday. And the last thing is we posted to the calendar events, as Tom mentioned, the public demo for the ES&S voting system tool for January 14th, I think it was, right? With regard to NVRA, Michael and Patrick visited New York City this month. So they have completed every county board in the 2-year cycle now for nice voter review purposes. With regard to website accessibility.
On that issue, how do we stand in terms of nice voter compliance now by all the counties?
Every board that we visited was substantially compliant or completely compliant. So they are keeping up to date. There were a couple of boards that had some minor issues where they were over the 30 days on certain things like deceased cancellations or updating duplicates or things like that. They have substantially improved those positions, so I think they're all doing what we need them to do and they are in compliance. So again, the website accessibility issue, the first report that was due under the settlement was submitted in October, and we continue to have internal meetings with IT and the other stakeholders to discuss the parts of the website that need to have final action before the end of the year. So Cheryl, do you want to talk about the grants?
I will. And just a quick comment, we also posted the November 1st enrollment numbers.
Oh, that's right, I forgot that.
As Bob mentioned, 2 county boards were reimbursed in full for the 2 early voting grants. They were Niagara and Yates. And I have some brief statistics on both grants. For the capital grant, 91% or 53 counties submitted their grant paperwork to the state board. 51 of those were approved by the state comptroller and sent back to the county board, and 8 submitted claim for payment.
So Cheryl, what are the 5 counties that haven't submitted?
I don't have, I had that information, I didn't bring my folder with me. But I can have it for you, I'm hoping at the next board meeting to
Okay.
give a more robust statistics, because a trend we've seen happening is that unlike other grants where people submit, and they submit for some cost, counties are submitting one claim for payment because their costs are higher than the grant amount. But I can get you that information either tomorrow in an email if you would like, or at the next meeting. For the 8 localities,
I think if you had it for the conference.
I'll have it for the conference. On 8 localities, the state board received 41 grants from the county boards, that's 71%. 31 were approved by the state comptroller and sent back to the county board. 17 have not yet been received. 3 claims were submitted for payment. And again, for instance, yesterday we received Putnam, and they sent in both claims for payment, and the claim for payment, and the expenses far exceeded the claim for payment.
Okay. Is that all?
That is all.
Do you have anything else? Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to ITU. Bill Cross?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I also apologize for not having a written report with me. In terms of system development, we continue on all fronts. As Bob indicated, we're making significant progress on the online voter registration. Even with not having the upfront funding, we are actively, or have been actively pursuing development business requirements and drafting what the new architecture for that system will be. On Captus Vitus, our development continues as well. We make significant progress in most of the application development, but as I footnoted each time, the difficulty we've had so far with completing it has been data migration from the legacy system to the new system and moving it all over so all the balances are correct and things like that. That is an effort we're still struggling with, and although we've made significant progress on it. My other footnote has generally been staffing, and it's also been very difficult the past 2 months in that regard as well. We did lose 1 key tester and 1 developer. The tester is now back, and that was due to a visa issue. The other person set the promotion at a different agency, so we're now backfilling that item. But progress is continuing. We are still very close to implementation. I hope by the next board meeting I'll give you full detail of laying out what that timeline actually looks like and what the planning and rollout and implementation details are for it at that point. We have also, on the security front, we've completed, several of the vendors now completed several of the county board risk assessments. They've provided to the counties with an offer of discussing the reports and also enlisting some feedback from them in terms of what kind of assistance would be useful for them in mitigating the results of those risk assessments. We have not yet really received anything substantial back from the counties in terms of that ask, but we will follow up, and intend to follow up with them. Since that time, we've also finalized a few more reports, and they will probably be going out by the end of this week. Also in security front, we continue to work on and develop a scope for a new project for a next version of what election infrastructure will look like in terms of increasing security end to end. We are in discussions with Center of Technology and Government on that. We're currently revising the scope to a manageable resource level and cost estimate. I'm trying to think what else we've done. It's been busy. I'm just not, it's not allowed to come to me at the moment. Accessibility, we are in very good shape in terms of what our requirements are for the end of December. Two significant systems that have to be brought up to date to meet accessibility guidelines of the voter lookup and election night reporting. Both of those are being redeveloped and will be complete by, fully expect to be complete by the end of the month. The benefit is not only are we implementing the requirements we have to for accessibility, but also in terms of responsiveness. So they will be much better user experience now on a cell phone or a tablet, sizable, things along those lines. So we take an opportunity to update the user interfaces on them as well. I do not have the stats for the web in front of me. I can share them separately, particularly on election day. But it was
Public
Um,
Go ahead.
I take it you're working on the online voter registration project that we were talking about before with the funding issues. Has there been interaction with the New York City Public Campaign Finance Board? And what is your evaluation of the usability of their system
So
for
the
a
system-
statewide application?
The system itself, from what I've seen, is not a pick it up, put it on, where we can use it that way. A lot of the work that was developed in terms of the online screens and the workflow and things along those lines, we are definitely utilizing. We're actually using that as a basis for our own user interface development as we go through it now.
So it is going to save some of the costs?
Yes.
By taking that on? Great. Okay, and then the second thing is that to what extent are you involved so far in what computer resources are needed for the public campaign finance implementation?
Not yet.
Okay.
I certainly will be, I'm sure.
No, there hasn't been any internal full meetings yet on that.
Are there going to be submissions made to budget in terms of, and what's the timeline
I
for?
mean, with everything that's been happening, Todd and I met with Deputy Secretary Smith, I'm doing it from memory, last Wednesday. And there were a number of things on our regular agenda to talk with him. He asked us to start focusing in January on what that I mean, we've got a pretty big list already, but what that list will be. I mentioned it to Kim and others that that's what they're looking for in early January to make sure that whatever, our ask will be. And from that perspective, I don't think it's what we need in next year's budget as big as what we also need immediately in this fiscal year to get started.
Well, there's two components. One, we need to work on the software immediately. Because, as we all know, things take longer than we generally first anticipate.
And Kim, when you say the software, hum us a few bars on what the,
Well, for
What-
example, we have two different types of matching ratios. We have a statewide matching ratio at 6-1 for any donation up to 250, and we have thresholds that have to be met before someone qualifies. We have a legislative in-district match on a progressive scale, starting at 12-1, down to 8-1, 12-1 for the first $50, 9-1 for the next $100, and then 8-1 for the next $100. So there has to be a way to distinguish if I give $50 now and $50 then and $100 there. And then there's also which matching ratio do you use? How do we identify that? What does the treasurer is responsible to do? We're hoping to, or I'm hoping to, because I'm and the rest of the commission on that finance are hoping that the treasurer, when they start to punch in a name to give a donation, will have a sort of drop-down screen so they can see the prior contributions. And there's an interesting one that came late to the table with a $250 clawback. Basically, if you give more than $250, none of your donation will be matched. So if I give you $250 in district now, I'm sure somebody's gonna challenge it, is it $250 now, we do 1298. If I give you $100 later, it's incumbent on the treasurer to either recognize that and give back that contribution and continue with the 2,600 that the first 250 provided, or if they proceed forward, they have to be identified that all of the clawback, all of the public funds that they were given based upon that first donation have now exceeded a matchable limit, and we take all of the money back.
And if they make that mistake, they'll get fined and penalized.
Well, hopefully, the goal.
I didn't even follow it, so sorry.
No, the goal is that the compliance unit will will identify that in the review of these filings.
So those dollar thresholds are not per donation, it's per donor.
Per donor.
Per donor. So you
Per
have to,
cycle.
you have to be able to merge those donors' contributions over the
That's right.
cycle of a campaign.
That's right. And we hopefully the compliance unit will say to Bob Brem running for state senate, we matched your $100 donation to this amount. Now somebody's gonna give you $200 more. We're gonna have to take that money back, or you're gonna have to return that donation. I mean, it's not a gotcha as much as a compliance effort that's gonna have to be undertaken in the get-go. And it'll take some getting used to. And it's gonna take a little work. And all of that manual work, you can't really do it manually. So we're gonna have to develop some sort of system that will identify, you know, when you punch in KIM, GAL with two little parts of an address, there'll be a drop down for any possible matches within that district. We also have an average median income requirement for the legislative districts, which will lessen the thresholds that the candidates need to meet prior to being able to be matched. That AMI decision has to be made 2 years prior to the event, which is basically now, because the first donations are 2022.
So Kim is the best expert on this now.
From an administrative point of view.
I'm excited about it. I really, and I'm not even being
I wouldn't be
sarcastic. I am
excited
so
if
far
I had
into
to-
this thing.
If I had to prepare my budget every year, I wouldn't be excited.
And no, you wouldn't, but I'm into it.
I'm
We're
just
gonna
telling
do
you
it.
from my perspective.
We are gonna do it.
So from the budget.
Even though I'm ideologically
from the budget
completely opposed to it.
perspective,
We're gonna do it.
Now, if I had a large family, I could scam this whole system every time there was an election.
You could.
Don't you?
And I could make 10 to 1 on my money.
I think you're working against your own self-interest here, but you could. That's why we have to be very careful. But what it does incentivize that the candidates work within their districts for the smaller donor.
Yes.
A smaller donor of $50 is now worth $600. A $250 donation is worth 23 or 24, or whatever the math works out to be. So the focus now should be $100 barbecues, $50 barbecues within your district, as opposed to going outside for the larger contribution limits. And if you followed anything, you understand that the limits have been reduced considerably that take effect in 2022 when this program
Although
starts.
you'd never know it from reading the press.
You would never know that 67,900 has been reduced to 18, 9,000 in a primary and 9,000 in a general, and it's still, you know, a catastrophe.
I
I'm
love this
very glad I
enthusiasm.
heard you speak, because I know everyone thought this through.
We did think it through.
I know.
We
But-
talked about it
Too
a
much.
lot.
But from a funding point of view, we have a lot of work to do, and as it's the, I hate to keep bringing this
I
back.
love the enthusiasm.
It is our challenge, and if we don't get any money until the next fiscal year to start, it is going to be, a challenge. So
My
there's-
father-
it will be a challenge if we get money in January,
When
but
my state legacy is a public financing program, my father is flipping in a grave somewhere. I can tell you that.
This is quite simple. Kim wants public financing and Doug Kellner wants voter ID.
It must be the DEC.
yes, Virginia, there is a Senate.
I didn't say that though, John. Don't quote me. I said this is a better biometric system. I did not advocate it.
I think we can do it.
Voter ID?
No, public finance.
So I think if I can just send Kim to some programming classes, computer, our system issues.
No,
She can do the business rules.
I can do I got the business rules, dude. I got flow charts. I got everything. I'm ready. Except till the court throws it out with no severability clause. Then I'm gonna be really
The
sad.
ironic thing is
And
that
they're
the
just gonna
bank
put it
that's
right
gonna
back
take
into
I
this
think they
money
might. I
They're
think
just
they
gonna
might.
put it right
require
back into the budget.
require an ID card.
Well, banks to open the account requires something.
For new bank accounts, yes, they do.
You don't need an ID
Right.
card, Andy.
In a
Stay
bank?
away from that. We
This
talk
is all
about
you
public
should need.
financing.
Oh, well,
Bank of
that, no, I understand
Right.
that. But you need something is my point.
Go back to public financing.
I need something to get in the building.
Yeah, well, my,
I do know it though. I was excited.
I'm
And
glad you're
Andy-
enthusiastic.
and
about this.
Andy-
It's good.
With the finger, you shouldn't need registration. It should work the other way. You're registered
No, I
unless
think
you're
that's-
not
I think
18,
that's great.
and they have you in the system as a felon or an alien.
I think that's great.
Let's,
works.
Bill,
You walk up to a
Anything else?
machine, you put your
I'm
finger
sorry.
in it,
anything else? Any other questions?
takes your face, and you bring that, you get your ballot, and that's it.
That's it, you're done.
he's very
That's it.
tolerant today.
Any other questions for Bill?
No. She's, no.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very well educated.
That is the end of our ATU report. Next is enforcement by Risa Sugarman. And I noticed that Risa isn't here again today. I just have to ask, was Risa asked to attend the meeting?
Yes.
She has been again. So again, she's refused to come? Is that
And
fair
she
to say?
received.
Well, I will say I'm very disappointed by this for myself, that she's refusing to come to our meetings now. We did get a ruling from the court on the issue that I think she was using to not come to these meetings. And now the court has ruled, and she still refuses to come. So I don't quite understand why. I know she lost the case, but that should not be a reason not to attend our meetings. So unfortunately, we're not going to get a report from her, which I think is too bad.
We did.
And unfortunate.
We did ask for the report. I want to say after the court decision, we communicated the decision and requested the report that was ordered in the decision, and we were told that she won't talk about it until she wants to talk about it.
Yeah, I don't understand what her basis is then for not attending our board meetings. Did she articulate one to you?
She hasn't really, other than I think that while this litigation is pending, I do note, and correct me, I think Kim is suing over the public financing in her capacity
So I never have to
elsewhere.
come again.
And she still comes.
That's right, I am suing to say it's unconstitutional.
so-
Well, I will,
Excited.
well, I will
I don't
say,
think
I mean, I
personally she's
never, I
suing.
never agreed with the premise that if you're suing the board, you still don't have to attend meetings.
all our
I really
staff
don't
would
agree
do
with
that.
that. But at the same time, once the litigation is ended, which I believe it did in October, when the judge ruled, it seems to me that issue has now been resolved, and there is no basis to not attend meetings. And I think it's very unfortunate that this board is not able to receive a report from Risa Sugarman, ask questions of Risa Sugarman, and get information from her unit,
Should send a subpoena.
As she's required by law.
as she's required by law. So,
All right. Can we, just so, let's go through the report. How many criminal referrals have there been this year?
0.
And
I don't know what was answering.
how,
We'll chime in with the 0 anytime you want.
no, how many hearing officer proceedings have been commenced?
2 in 2019.
And how many referrals for non-filing have been made to her unit?
Many. For the January periodic, it was 2,652, of which 2,085 remain outstanding. And for the July periodic, there were 2,533 that were referred.
And how many complaints how many complaints has she notified us have been resolved?
Want to say it?
0.
Well, there's
And-
been no notice of,
But the statute
Yeah,
requires
requires.
that she notifies the commissioners when she closes a complaint. And the answer is 0. And, how many judgments have been obtained this year?
I think some, I'm not sure.
Judgments?
No?
I think
No.
we're at
Oh, no,
zero.
judge,
I think we're safely at
fines, yeah.
0 there.
Right, judgments for fines are 0. And judgments that were on the books from prior years that have been recovered, has she reported the recovery of any judgments?
I don't know what the answer to that is, but at least through the admin group, when she deposits money, we would know. And there has been some activity in that regard.
that was, she told us that instead of her giving us that number, we should look through our administrative books and figure it out ourselves.
So there is a number, but we don't know what it is. And she hasn't reported it.
Okay. And in any event, that would be from prior years because she hasn't gotten any judgments
the
this year.
last time the agency obtained a judgment, Mr. McCann would know for sure, but I believe we did the January 2014 periodic filing. We completed that with a judgment. The July periodic is when the law changed, and we sent out the 5-day letters, but we did not get a judgment at that time. So our end of collecting it before this was for the January 2014 activity.
And she has collected on settlements, and I don't know what the number is.
All right. And I forgot to ask subpoenas that have been requested.
0.
I think I'm finished.
Okay, well, I don't know, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's very frustrating to me, I imagine it is to the other commissioners as well, that we are unable to get any information out of that unit, that she actually refuses to attend board meetings. I just find it unconscionable that you
You know-
would just
Insubordinate.
refuse to even attend a board meeting.
I wouldn't even be upset about failing to attend the board meetings if there were actual productivity coming out of the office. And it just strikes me, I am amazed that the good government groups are so passive about the fact that there hasn't been a single criminal referral this year, not a single subpoena this year. Only 2 out of 2,000 non-compliers, non-filers have been the subject of enforcement.
Could I
That nothing is going on for this budget that is almost 5 times the budget that was available to the Board of Elections before the creation of that unit, when we were doing more than 1,000 a year.
Just since I raise budget so often, each of the last years, under the 5 years of this program, that division has not spent 1/3 of their allocation. So consider if it's an agency, what agency of state government has not spent 1/3 of their budget?
What happens to that third?
It goes back into the general fund and it's lost.
Well, better that than, but the problem is that they're probably doing only 5% of what the legislature thinks that they're paying for, and spending 70%. So it's not even an effective, I mean, frankly, does anybody really know what any of the people in that office are doing to earn their paychecks?
I don't think we have any idea what anybody in that office is doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I
I
wouldn't say that
just
they're
think
not,
we
but
should make it
don't know.
clear.
Right, we
That's
just
the
don't
So
know.
that everything we say,
No one
everything
knows.
we do goes through our legal responsibility for oversight. That's why we do it.
Well, this idea that you're unaccountable to anyone is extremely troubling to me. Everyone's accountable to somebody, and she seems to feel she's accountable to nobody. That is very concerning and very worrisome to me. People should be accountable. People in government need to be accountable. They need to be held accountable. And she apparently feels she has no need to be held accountable for anything that she does. Very unfortunate. Very worrisome, I might add. Okay. I'm willing to move on then, if everyone else is. We'll move on to old business. Actually, this first piece of old business goes to something very pertinent to her office. This is the use of force policy, which I know is mandated by the state statute, that every office has to have a use of force policy. I know that you've been going back and forth with Reese, I guess the staff has, that's what I'm told, is that correct?
That's correct.
With her about trying to resolve the use of force. I don't myself completely understand what the issues are. Of course, she's not here to ask or to discuss it with her, so again, we're stymied, in my view, to try to resolve this issue because of her failure to come to the meeting, yet again, to discuss a matter that's very pertinent to her office. In fact, it's only pertinent to her office as far as this agency is concerned. So I don't know where we stand exactly. I know,
Well, could I
Do
be
we have a
heard
board-
on this?
but I'm happy to discuss it, absolutely.
All right, well, my understanding of the reason that the legislature adopted the law requiring agencies to have a use of force policy was that the agencies would define what is actually authorized by persons who have peace officer or police officer status within their agencies. You have the penal law indicates what the rights are of police officers and peace officers, but those are very, very broad powers. So in addressing what the Board of Elections policy should be, the first question I've asked around is, since this agency was formed in 1974, how many instances have there been where the agency, where an employee of the State Board of Elections has used physical force? And I'm told the answer is none, zero. In 47 years, there has not been a single incident that anybody knows about where a State Board of Elections employee has used physical force. So then the next question is, well, what are the hypothetical instances where a State Board of Elections official would need to use physical force that could not be accommodated by the alternative provision in our authorizing statute that says that the state police and local police are at our disposal. And indeed, with respect to local police, are required to follow orders of the commissioners of the elections. And indeed, the statute says local police are required to follow the instructions of inspectors of elections with respect to their poll sites. So again, why would any State Board of Elections employee need to use physical force rather than calling for help from the police? And I think the answer is clear. I mean, we haven't had to do that in 47 years, and right now on the horizon, there are no hypothetical scenarios where that would be necessary. Now, if somebody walks through that door and holds out a gun at us, are we entitled to use physical force? Well, of course we are, but that's not because we're State Board employees, but because we're citizens of New York who are exercising the rights that anybody has. So I have been advocating that our use of force policy should be that there is no authorized use of physical force by a State Board of Elections employee, and that if somebody can come up with scenarios in the future where it may be appropriate, then the commissioner should review that policy.
Well, I think that really begs the question of whether we should have a designated peace officer status at this board. I mean, that's always been an issue at the board. I know years ago, this predates Risa Sugarman, certainly. The investigative unit, there was always a question of whether there was any need to have anybody designated as a peace officer whose status was really to give them the opportunity or the ability to carry a weapon. And that's really what the peace officer status grants to an individual if you're going to give them that authority. And I will say, the legislature takes this so seriously that every time a locality wants to designate an office as a peace officer, they have to go through the state legislature to do it, because they know what a powerful tool that is. They don't just even delegate that to local jurisdictions to designate peace officers, because it is a very powerful tool that is used. But I agree with the commissioner that I'm unaware of a situation that this board's ever been in where a staff member who was in the investigative unit had the need to exert physical force upon someone based on an investigation they had undertaken. That most of the investigations don't require any sort of on-site interaction anyways. Typically, the on-site interaction is when you're serving something related to a lawsuit that we've commenced, but that's done not by this agency, but by process servers that we hire. So we're not actually sending our people out into the community to serve documents on people. We're having process servers do that for us. So it's not our staff that's in that situation. So the idea that there needs to be a peace officer, a person carrying a weapon, who represents this agency in the context of their duties, I just don't think, or is belied by the experience of the agency, which is we just don't put our employees in that situation. So I agree that really, I mean, the issue to me is, why do we have peace officers designated here at this agency in any capacity, whether they're investigators or whatever other job they hold?
So to that end, Brian and Todd worked out a draft that I'm prepared to move for adoption that would terminate the designation of any state board of elections employees as peace officers.
Actually, it doesn't quite do that, Commissioner.
Well, why don't you read read what we're talking
Yep,
about,
I would
and
like
then you
to
can
do that.
explain it.
So the operative be it resolved clauses would be, be it resolved that effective immediately, special investigators of the State Board of Elections shall not be permitted to possess or use any firearm in their capacity as a special investigator for the State Board of Elections, and it's hereby the policy of the State Board of Elections that its special investigators shall not be armed, and be it further resolved that notice of the adoption of this resolution shall be provided to the Chief Enforcement Council within 1 day of its adoption. The way the statute works is that by virtue of being a special investigator under the election law, under the criminal procedure law, they're automatically peace officers. They have that status. They have to go through certain training and meet the quals in order for them to hold that status, but they're by virtue of the statute, they're automatically a peace officer. Mr. Cartagena did some research, and based on provisions of the criminal procedure law, it appears, however, that an agency that has folks that are in the capacity of peace officer the employer can say no to guns. So there would be, the assertion here would be that you would still have special investigators, but you would be prohibiting guns.
Fair enough.
And they would still be peace officers.
Okay.
Okay.
But because they're still peace officers, then we still need a use of force policy, and we can adopt this resolution today. I'm prepared to move it and vote for it, but we would still need a use of force policy, and I would urge that the policy we adopt is that no state board of elections employee is authorized to use physical force, but if necessary, to carry out the duties of the Board of Elections, should call upon the state police or local law enforcement for assistance. But we don't have to vote on that today. We can
We just have to make it
write
clear
that
that
up.
it's no unjustified. I mean, there could be circumstances.
This
just
does
as you
not
said.
affect the
Right,
rights of
right.
everybody as a citizen,
Right.
but they would have no special status
Correct.
as state board employees to use
Correct.
physical force that everybody else doesn't have already.
So you move the,
So
Are you
I'm
moving
moving
the
this
adoption?
resolution as Mr. Quayle read.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's carried unanimously. So you will then, Brian, you'll notify Risa of this
Absolutely.
based on the,
I will deliver it to her office.
based
first
on
thing
the
tomorrow.
requirement that
If they let us
be
know.
notified by tomorrow. And then the use of force policy, then we are still in discussions as far as what that will
We'll have to
actually.
review it and
I
amend
think
it.
based on
Yes,
your
based on
comments,
this
we'll lay it
discussion.
aside and
Okay.
bring it back at your next meeting.
Because I know we've not, I know this is a statutory requirement. I think we're already past our time frame, so I don't want to hold this up more than we have to. But I think at the next meeting, we definitely need to get this done.
I think certainly we understand your
Okay,
wishes and
okay.
we'll draft it
Okay,
appropriately.
fair enough. Then let's move on to another piece of old business, the Fair Campaign Code matter that I know has been pending for
It's
some
still in
time.
court.
Still in court, so there's no reason for us to take that up today. Anybody want to take that up today, or should we hold that over, or should we just dismiss it? What's our position here?
My recommendation, Commissioners, is that we have a strong policy of leaving things on old business, but I think that it would be wise to allow it to lapse from old business, and we'll bring it back if and when something happens.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to.
It's still in
treat it-
court? Is that the
Yes.
situation? Okay.
Yes, and it seems very likely that the issues that surround the complaint itself will in fact be resolved. And
I would hope
it's
so.
a
So I would,
policy
I would favor we just put this aside and take it off old business. If the staff feels the need to bring it back onto old, or onto business at some point in the future, we'll take it up then. Anybody have it?
Fine.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll move on to new business, unless there's any other old business.
No.
No. So new business now, we have several regulations that we are considering.
All three
And-
of these are just to continue the emergency regulations? Is there
No,
any
except
new
for-
text?
Actually, we have one of
Triple
each.
little,
This is-
No,
this is the
yeah, I
trifecta.
think I've taken them individually.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so let's do the first one, the 6210.7 through .10 ballot accountability.
This is a final adoption of the
This is final
conforming
adoption.
changes to these regulations that accommodated the issues related to the discontinuation of ballot stubs
Right.
and that sort of thing. So these are largely conforming changes.
And this is final adoption,
This is, yes.
and we have received no comments? Is that correct? No comments at all, okay. Is there a motion
So
to
moved.
adopt? So
So
moved to
moved.
second,
Yep.
any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Then that one is finally adopted. The next one is 6211, procedures for early voting.
And Commissioner, this is continuing on an emergency basis, the current regulations. We do anticipate that there will be changes and in all likelihood sufficient enough to require, additional comment period on a final adoption. At this point in time, the experience from the prior election and the ongoing roundtables are being assessed for changes to this. So
Okay.
this simply holds it in place in its current form until those proposed amendments are brought
So
forward.
how long will these emergencies stay till we have to act again?
The longest that we can extend is 60 days, so
Okay.
this is a 60-day
Okay,
extension.
okay.
The first extension can be 90 days, but subsequent ones have to be 60.
Okay, so it's a 60-day extension of those regulations. Is there any
And-
motion?
And we have gotten comments on these
Yes.
regulations from a number of sources.
Quite a few.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there a motion to
So moved.
extend this? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's adopted as well for next 60 days. The final regulation is the 6200, this is the financial disclosure filing regulation. This is to change the need for a 10-day post primary to a July 15th during the June primary, right? To
Yes,
accommodate those, merge those together to only require the July report?
Yes, and this just puts out the draft.
This is a
regulations for
first, this is a first round on this
Yes,
one,
and
right?
it's not being
Okay.
adopted on an emergency basis, it's
Okay.
just putting it out.
Okay, is there any discussion?
The only comment I have, or question really, is did you consider flipping it the other way? That if you were a primary candidate, that you wouldn't have to file a July 15th report, but you'd have to file a 10-day report.
Yes, we did consider that. There was sort of it was like a logic game because the statute has a number of different tiers of requirements that whatever scheduling scheme that we provide must meet. One of them is that there be a report filed at least once every 6 months. So what would end up happening if we moved it back from July 15th by 2 weeks, the January periodic would be more than 6 months out from when that filing would be.
Yeah.
The next January would be what, yes.
What do you think of that?
Well, that's the answer.
I mean, I have to say, I have little or no interest in these post-election reports to begin with. I mean, once the election's over, the idea that I have to do another report afterwards is a little superfluous to me because the election's over. And the whole idea that people want to know how you're spending your money or where your money's coming from is lost. The election's over. So I'm not bothered at all by eliminating this post-primary filing. I think it's a good idea. I think, fewer filings in this situation make more sense. We've already got a July 15th requirement.
Let me add one more cynical comment, which is that there's really no consequence if you ignore that 10-day filing date. Because there's just no way either the board or enforcement council are going to seek any penalties or sanctions. Now, I guess when we do public
We'll have to
campaign
add some more
finance, that
filings,
could
that's right.
change. But all right.
Is there a motion to adopt this proposed regulation?
Oh, and
Hearing
just-
nothing.
So moved.
Yes, publish it.
I'm sorry.
So moved.
To publish it. It's been
Second.
moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So that is also adopted. So that completes the regulations. We now move on to the HAVA funding expenditure resolution.
All right, Bob explained before.
We're going to put that off, is that?
No,
No, this
we're
is the
gonna
one,
do this.
this is, the.
Oh, this one we're
we
doing.
went a
This is the
little bit
original
over the original
appropriation of-
budget.
Right, this, we need
So we
a
need to,
commissioner vote to spend original Help America Vote Act money, and it for allowable expenses, both cybersecurity and Nice Voter.
I so
To the
moved.
extent of $2.3 million, not to exceed.
So this is separate and apart from that cybersecurity money that we're going to have to allocate next time. Okay? Is there any discussion?
I moved.
There's a motion to adopt. Is there a second?
A second.
There's a second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we have now adopted that, and we have one last one. This is regarding hearing officers. There's a resolution to appoint, I believe we're down to one hearing officer right now, is that correct?
No, we have 3. This just merely takes 2 that would expire at the end of the month and have them reappointed.
Oh, these are expiring then if we don't appoint them. I see.
Correct.
So these are current hearing officers? Okay, we would just be
These are
reappointing
reappointed.
two current hearing officers, Amy Kendall and Sharon Miller.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So that completes that.
Do we have a date for our next meeting?
We already selected
We got
January
January
6th.
January
16th.
16th. Anybody have any issues with that, or?
That's fine. I would like a motion to go into executive session to
We're gonna go into
discuss
executive.
litigation and personnel matters.
Okay, is there anything else to come before the board before we go into executive session in the public session? If not, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session for purposes of litigation and personnel. Motion's been made, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to go into executive session. I don't anticipate us coming back out of executive session, so for the members of the public here, I don't think we'll go back into public session after this. So thank you very much, and have a nice holiday.
16, okay.